anyway, all the point to say, I think where you're coming around to is that forever, even in God's people, there's been this impulse to consolidate and to have more services. And what if we had a guy to fight for us? What if we had more centralized power? From the beginning, God says, that's not a good idea. That comes with some costs. And we're experiencing that now.
That's weird. Oh well, I'll just wing it.
Yeah, all good. We're experienced.
Yep. A little bit. All right, here we go. Welcome back, everybody, to Drop the Mask. I've got a very special guest, and actually the first returning guest on the show, so congratulations on that. He has written a book called National Divorce, A Plan for Peace, and also does knife making in his spare time, has written several books on that, writes for magazines, and he was featured on the show Forged in Fire. So, Jason Fry, welcome back to the show.
Hey, glad to be back. Thanks, Jason.
My pleasure, my pleasure. We had a great conversation last time. Well, let's start with you. Anything I missed in the introduction? Anything you'd like to say before we get rolling?
So our last experience was sort of intentionally one-dimensional, right? I was talking about the book and stuff, but man, I try hard to be more interesting than just one story. I do those things that you said. So I work in mental health in my day job, and then I make knives in the evenings and weekends. Diligently. So for about 15 or 16 years, I've been doing that as a very serious hobby. If you ask the IRS, it's a hobby. It's a hobby. But past that, I mean, it's very serious. And then I also write books. So just because this is my first politics book that we've talked about before doesn't mean it's the first thing I ever wrote. So I wrote actually 3 knife making books. The first one, I wanted to have written a book. Different than wanting to write one. I wanted to have written one. And so I thought, well, how can I accomplish this? So I got out and hustled 17 other people to write chapters. And then I wrote another 5 and edited the whole thing. So our first book was an anthology, Next Level Knife Making. I parlayed that and my ADHD into another book, which was 384 knife making tips. It's called Knife Making Hacks. So 384 times I just went squirrel and wrote it down. Right. And so I have this long list of 3-sentence tips and tricks and pretty pictures. That book has actually done pretty well. And I wrote a book called Blade's Guide to Knife Buying. So what's this knife? What's that knife? Why is this one expensive? What's that steel? All, intro to the.
So
those are my three books. Yeah.
Unfamiliar with the whole thing. I'm actually surprised that you could fill 3 books with things about knife making. I did take some classes about material science and how you heat treat metals and stuff through my engineering.
So if I say austenite and martensite, you know what I'm talking about, ish.
I remember those words, but
they exist. Yeah, I got you. Yeah, so these are not super technical. So the first one I got experts to write about fairly technical chapters by people that can speak fairly technically. The second one, again, is just ADHD knife making. It's the best knife making toilet book in the world. It's not designed to be read linear. Anyway. And then the other one's just an introduction, so it's intentionally not too deep, but it's broad on purpose.
And I saw you had a cool little contraption there that you made on Forged in Fire.
I did. So I built my own power hammer from scratch. It's the functional equivalent of opening up a big giant tub of Legos and building a car. So you can buy a kit and build a car of Legos, and that's easy with there's instructions. Or you can just go to the tub and just freewheel it. It's like, I need this little piece. It's this shape, right? So I did that. I built a 40-pound mechanical power hammer in my backyard.
That's awesome.
My thought was that I built it for the show. I built it to go on Forged in Fire. My thought was that if I didn't make the final, I would still have a hammer. If I did make the final, I would have a good tool that would help me. I did it for that. I ended up making the final. Came home and built my thing and back, and it bent about this much. And so I lost fair and square. A lot of times I'll take the tool out and I'll say, look at this bend. What's the measurement of that? No, the question is, I say it's negative 10,000. The thing I built right there.
Oh yeah.
It usually turn the other way because of the lighting, but Yeah, so the loser gets to keep their thing. So didn't win $10,000, but I got to bring my spear home. It's called a key long G.
I was about to ask if there was a prize, so no runner-up prize. Just you get to
Nope,
keep your
you
stuff.
get to keep your thing. The winner gets their money, and the people keep the thing. The loser gets their thing back, and that's it.
Wow. Yeah, that's cool. They
That was
provide the
my
materials and everything.
some. They give you a little bit of stuff, and then they give you a little bit of a budget, both of which are not sufficient to do the whole thing. But yeah, it's fine.
Very cool.
They fly you up there and fly you back. I mean, there's not much expense involved. You're doing them some work. You don't get paid either, but they at least pay it all.
How long did you have to stay there?
Took about 3 weeks start to finish, but realistically, it was 2 trips to New York, and they came down here for
Down to Texas.
Yeah, they shot in my backyard in my neighborhood. It's kind of funny, kind of weird. You go outside and you're like, hey, this was on TV, but it's right here. It's my house.
It's great. Yeah. Well, we're on TV right now.
Yeah, ta-da!
Your website also says you're a behavior analyst. What
That
does
is
that
true.
entail?
Okay, so where do I start? I start with intellectual disabilities. So you've got a wide variety of things that formerly used to be called mental retardation, right? That's the word people still know. And just because you have, some condition like that does not mean you need to live in an institution, okay? But
Yeah, just look at me.
yeah, exactly. Same. But
Glad
there are
you're here.
folks that encounter too much law enforcement or they encounter too much medical problems, right? So your behavior is such that they keep calling the cops. And so you really can't live in town, right? Or your medical is so complex that you need a nurse all the time. So you really can't just buy one. Those folks end up sometimes living in institutions. I work for the state of Texas in a system that runs 13 facilities inpatient for folks with disabilities. So my day job is behavior. Again, I mentioned, sometimes they end up with us because they have behavior challenges, right? So they'll hurt themselves or they'll hurt other people or a variety of other things. And so my job is to make the plan to keep that from happening and plan for how to respond when it does to minimize harm to everybody, all the administrative stuff that goes along with that. So that's what
So
I
I guess
do. I try to keep
plans
people from
would have
hurting
to
each
be-
other.
Yeah, right. I guess those plans would have to be pretty individualized.
Very. Every individual gets 20 or 30 hours of focused assessment a year where all you're doing is trying to figure them out again. Just check, make sure the stuff is still on point from last year. And because really what we're fishing for, we'll shortcut here, but what pisses them off and how can we not do that? And it doesn't have to be reasonable. Like I had a guy one time that, he had bad trauma history. And if you were wearing a red shirt, he was going to come get you. Okay. So it's sometimes as simple as figuring out don't wear the red when you work at that house because it helps everybody have a better day, right? It's not about, for me, about value or right or wrong or this is smart, this is dumb, or this is, it's about how can we help everybody have good days? That's my job. So that parlayed really philosophically into the National Divorce Book. Man, I think I talked last time about the Shelby Park thing where you had feds and Texans lined up on opposite sides of a fence. My whole behavior de-escalation instinct said we got to not do that because I've been in enough bad behavior situations where I know that sometimes it escalates and gets nasty, not on purpose or not even by ill. Yeah, so that whole philosophy of let's make a plan to predict to do this ahead of time so that it doesn't escalate, and then let's figure out what the plan looks like to de-escalate things. That's my day job. I just applied that philosophically to politics. That other book came from.
That's a great segue into what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
I wanted to focus on the tribalism aspect of it. And the United States today, it seems like we're more divided than we have been in a long time. There's a huge bifurcation in the political tribes, I would say, and it seems to be fueled by different feelings about maybe not racism per se, but how you feel about racism or religion, or whether the secular state religion or theological. Economics is another thing, socialism versus capitalism, and even geographical differences. So we have all these different things dividing us. Those are the hot ones anyway.
They are. And
So
it's a lot.
it's a complex web of different values and identities that lead us to misunderstanding and even hating each other sometimes. And Now, in 2025, with the new presidential administration coming in, it feels like a good time to reflect on how those divisions came about, how it affects our political discourse, what's our vision for the future.
Right. Sounds good. Sounds good.
So, yeah.
So I
So
would
you,
I would start at the very, very beginning. What's a tribe? What's tribalism? So tribalism to me is really just recognizing in groups and out groups, right? Let me make it simple. So I recognize that my family is me and my wife and my 4 children, but that we also have extended family, right? But they're still mine. And then there's other people at Walmart that are not my family, right? That's just tribalism. It's just the way to recognize who's in and who's out. We have various religious analogies that work pretty well on some of this, right? So if you go to a certain church, you've got certain traditions or certain verbal cues, shibboleths, if you want to go all the way back. You've got certain phrases, certain traditions that indicate, oh, this one is from the same background as me, right? So if it's an a cappella church, oh, that's probably Church of Christ, folks. We have our individual distinctives among every church, and those allow us to say this is one of us, and that's not one of us. That's all tribalism is, in my mind. So I argue that that is the natural or created, however you phrase it, doesn't matter. That's the state of humanity. Period. So whether you're thinking about Adam and Eve and Noah's families, or you're thinking about bands of Neanderthals, the analogy holds. People figured out quickly that living by yourself was not as good for survival as living with a group of people. And specialization and comes into play where I'm no good at making the knives, but I can find the animals. All the way down to I'm no good at computers, but I can do behavior. Right? I mean, we still specialize in our associations. And mutual defense, right? It's easier for 3 guys to fight a bear than it is for 1 guy to fight a bear.
Mhm.
Again, that escalates all the way to you think about tribes in Africa or American Indians, Native Americans. That was kind of the state of things. If you just leave people alone, that's kind of how they sort, right? That's kind of the natural state of humankind. And it's really only in the last few hundred years, maybe 5 if you're generous, but really just the last 200 or 300 years that we have built these, continental superpowers where your tribe is overrun by this giant political unit, right? Trumps all of that.
Mhm.
And it's not necessarily bad, right? I mean, I would say, freedom is nice, freedom is good, but we've fallen off into some errors on who decides mostly and on who's going to pay for it when it comes to dealing with tribes in a large political conglomeration.
Yeah, you use a phrase I like, intentional sorting. That's kind of
Yeah,
a modern
yeah.
thing we have that wasn't really possible in,
Hmm.
centuries past. People couldn't really go very far. But now
Yeah,
you can kind of pick and choose where you want to be, who you want to be around to some extent.
to some
It's never going to
extent,
be
right?
perfect.
And what's interesting about that is the different ways that people react. So if I move to a particular town or neighborhood in a town, that's intentional sorting, right? I may say I don't want to live over there. I want to live over here for reasons. They may be economic, they may be social, they may be who cares what they are. That's sorting on purpose based on some variables that are individualized to you. Similarly, we do that by churches. There are 1 bazillion churches, and we pick the one we like, or one not at all. But we pick a group that we want to associate with. Matt Kibb, in his book that I quote, says it does take a village, but a village is made up of people who voluntarily associate. I like that because yeah, it takes more than one person. I mean, you can't just all bootstrap it all, but voluntary association is really the key to all of that.
Preaching to the
People
choir.
associate. So when people associate by religion, nobody cares. Nobody cares at all. So if there is a Korean Christian church or an Eastern Orthodox church or an African Methodist Episcopal church or whatever, nobody cares. Those groups are free to associate based on some combination of religion and ethnicity or race. That's fine. Those are allowed to exist. But then if you decide to associate based on some unpopular versions of that, get creamed, right? So again, I would argue that it's not the sorting itself that's bad. It's people using force, saying you must go to this or that, or you may not, right? I would say segregation, voluntary segregation is awesome. Government-led segregation is wrong, right? So if they make it the law that these people can't go over there, can't do that. That's not okay, right? If I make it my family practice that I let everybody come to my house, or I don't let anybody come to my house. I mean, that's my business. That level of segregation on a personal level, okay with that. I'm not okay with, again, it being forced on you by the power of law.
Yeah,
That's
that's
just
kind
me.
of where it goes wrong, is when it's forced, and that I think causes a lot of conflicts. And I think that's also why tribalism tends to have a negative context when
Yeah,
it's out in the wild. But
yeah,
you do say
yeah.
it's a net positive.
I think so. I mean, I think it sustained humanity for however many years we've been alive, right? Again, whether you're thinking evolution or creation, you're still looking at thousands, if not bazillions of years, right? So for a long, 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 long time, for all of our existence except the last 5 minutes, metaphorically, tribalism has been the standard. And so it's hard to say that it's bad because it's what enabled us to survive. I mean, that's why we are bigger and smarter than monkeys, or that's why there's 7 billion of us on the world because we figured it out. That served us well. So yeah, that's where I would go with that. So I do think it is a net positive. I say in the book, though, the problem with tribalism isn't tribes; it's the use of force against other tribes. A bad tribe is not a tribe who treats its members crappily because they all have voluntarily agreed to be treated that way to a degree, right? A bad tribe is a tribe that says, my way should apply to those guys over there. Let's go get them. So the problem is podcast, not a sermon, right? The problem is assholes. The problem is people that are like, no, it should be my way everywhere. I'm going to go get them and make them do it, right? And every single tribe has those. That's a piece of humanity. People that are pleasant to deal with will always be there. That's the problem with tribalism, is when
Yeah,
the
you shared that.
snarky ones get in charge of stuff. That's what becomes a
Yeah,
problem.
you shared that meme. That was great. That was the guy saying, "I should," or "You should be free," and the other guy's crying and say, "No, I shouldn't."
No, I shouldn't. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So even freedom people are kind of that way. Yeah. So that's what I went off into in the book was, again, from my behavioral background, from my psychological background, religious background, the best way to not persecute somebody is to understand where they're coming from. Right. If they're crazy or evil, it's easy to persecute them. If they're rational but misguided, you can deal with that. Right. Even if, especially in my work, people attacking you, not okay. Right. If you were attacked on the street, that would be really bad. But in my line of work, you get attacked sometimes. But it's not because they're trying to steal your wallet. It's because of this super long collection of trauma history and disabilities and mental illness that's all behind all of that. And so it's really seldom about you when you get attacked. Realizing that enables you to serve these people. If you take it personal every time, you don't last long in this industry.
Hmm.
And so I've kind of taken that over to groups of people. So if you can understand where they're coming from, even if they're abusing you, you can at least sort of understand. You can see the background and not take it quite so personal. So kind of dove off into some tribes on the left and tribes on the right. Equal opportunity critic. Right? Talk about the tribes that I belong to and what's wrong with that.
Yeah,
I'll just
before we
pick on one
before we
particular
break it
side.
off to left and right, can we
Yeah,
talk about, is tribalism just like something baked into humanity, and
I
is there
believe it
any
is. I believe
escaping it, and would you want to?
you want to. Like I said, I think that's a natural state of humanity over time. Again, regardless of which perspective you take on how we came to be, right? On one side, you could say God created, and then he said, these are your tribes. He empowered and enforced and promoted that idea. On the other side, you've got, again, free state of man unencumbered, right? Seems to settle into tribes, whether it's Mongols or Africa or Native Americans, right? It's only the last few centuries of humanity that have been anything but that. So, yeah, I would say that's kind of the native state. It's kind of where we default to. automatically.
Have you heard of Dunbar's number?
Yes, not much, but Mark mentioned it the other night, and I have heard of the concept, but I wouldn't have labeled it as Dunbar.
Okay. Yeah, basically it's this social scientist named Dunbar. He studied people and all different animals and found that humans can tolerate up to about 150 real personal connections. Beyond that, it becomes like, oh, that's an acquaintance. Like you can remember people's names and kind of who they
Hmm.
are, but you cannot maintain personal relationships with more than 150 people on
Yeah, so
average.
there, from the church work side, yeah, there's a couple of critical points. About 100, 150 is kind of where the small ones settle. And then there's another kind of a node at about 350, 400, again, where churches just kind of land, right?
Hmm.
It's sort of weird. Again, I call it nodes. So in the distribution, there's a bunch at this point and a bunch at that point.
So within those groups, is there like I don't know how you call it, a division? Like there's different sections where people kind of align themselves? Does it do anything like that?
Not too much. Usually it's family groups. So a church with 100 people is going to have 3 or 4 big families, grandma and a couple or 3 kids and a couple or 7 grandkids. There'll be groups that way.
Yeah.
Bigger
Okay.
churches, it's not quite as much. Again, it's been a while since I studied that professionally, but the concept is the same. There's these kind of landing points of the right size of a group, right? Just
Yeah, so
by
once you get beyond about 150, that's when you start needing some management, or people do generally. You
yeah,
need some kind of leader, some kind of
right,
shared vision or thing that
yeah.
everyone's focused on to keep you together.
And that's a little bit that might be the difference in the church thing. Now that you mention it, is that the small, the 100 or 125, 80-person churches, that are a couple or 3 family groups. It's the family leaders, and they hire somebody to talk. It's in the larger ones, it's the minister, or the preacher, or the person doing the rhetoric kind of leads, and that can sustain a little bit larger group. I think you're onto something there.
Yeah, just an interesting concept. I mean, I think that plays into how people sort themselves and all that.
Absolutely. So another thing we talked about intentional sorting that I wanted to circle back to right now in the United States, and hopefully in the future, this United States, we have fairly free trade and fairly free movement of people, right? So if I decide, all these nutheads around me are not my people, I would fit better in California. I can move to California.
Hmm.
But mostly people do that for economic reasons, right? The job moves
Probably
over
don't want to
or
do that
something.
right now
Probably
with
not
the
right
fires
now. It's a
going on.
little warm.
Yeah.
But I know political refugees in Texas that have moved down here from New York because they lived in upstate rural New York and they didn't like how the big city was running things. Cool, man, bring it. Got some good friends who were pig farmers in California until California basically environmentally regulated pig farming out of existence. So then they took other jobs for a little while and then moved to Texas. They are rural Texas folks now. Other than their weird accents, so you couldn't tell they're from California, right? So um, I think that's good. That's a net positive, right? I think that is a benefit that we have in this modern age that previous generations didn't have, right? I can find a group of people that are like me, and I can go over there. That's cool. I think that's the way of the future. So again, I'm not a big fan of force or coercion on either side. So that means that if I have that one weird family that's a whole nother thing in my neighborhood, I shouldn't be an ass to those guys and make them do it. At the same time, that guy shouldn't be able to wave the flag of minority and force us to do it their way. Force is the problem. So I think the better solution really is just find groups of people that you like, hang out with those guys. It's the natural state of humanity.
Agreed. The last time I asked you about what you thought about the prospects of each presidential candidate getting into office and what that would mean for national divorce. So now that Trump has won, he's coming in about 9 days now. What do you think about the prospects at the moment?
So I can tell you that the book sales indicate that nobody is interested anymore. No, that's a little bit of a joke, but a little bit true. Like I'm more fluent in the language of the right and the grievances of the right. So I framed the book that I figured there was no way the machine would let Trump win, but he did. Cool. All right. And so that has impacted the ability for my message to take off. At the same time, you mentioned that meme. You have the right to be free. No, I don't, or whatever. That's how the left is a little bit. The principles of self-determination, the principle that California thinks Trump sucks. So California should be able to say, I would like to not be a part of that government. The left has the same exact fundamental right to self-determination as the right does. They just don't get it because they're more collective. I mean, that's their values is the collective and the greater good more rather than the individual. But the right is the same. The fundamental principle is the same. And so I've been out trying to say that message a little bit, but I think I probably said this last time. It's what I say most of the time. Neither candidate is going to shrink the deficit in any meaningful way or cut spending or change taxes or meddling in social issues okay. So if Trump, let's be generous. Let's say he made a 10% improvement. Let's say all his Doge stuff like really takes off. Mm-hmm. He's able to make a 10% difference. Okay, well, if we're 2,000% off and he makes a 10% difference, it's not going to make a difference. I mentioned in one podcast that it's like starting to exercise when you're 75. You may be way out of shape and you've lived a long time and you're about to die, and your doctor gets you straightened out and you're like, all right, I'm going to exercise now. That will absolutely improve your life. It absolutely will. It'll increase your lifespan, but it won't make you not 75. You're still towards the end. And I think that's the way I look at, to me, look like positive improvements coming out of the Trump regime. Yeah, those are good things, and they'll extend the life some, but it doesn't change the fundamental fact that this thing is old and dysfunctional.
Yeah,
it's kind of the way I look at it.
Right. I would expect with Trump winning, fewer Texans at least will be interested in national divorce for the moment.
For the moment. So our support has tended to grow regardless. The TNM's, Texas Nationalist Movement's supporter numbers have grown through all the regimes, again, because our message is not that guy's terrible, that the system doesn't work right. So we can still grow. We will still grow.
This.
And, you think about climbing a mountain. You ever climbed a mountain or a hill? Anyway,
yeah, sure.
I'm older and fatter than I used to be. So when I have to climb a hill, I go up a ways and then I stop and rest some, catch my breath, and then I go up some more. Or else the other alternative is you plod slow and steady, right? You just don't get too far out of breath for old guys to make it uphill. So that's kind of how I see Texas independence. There's two aspects. There's the aspect of slow and steady. We're going to keep making progress regardless of who's. And number two, sometimes we're going to rest and gather and catch our breath and then take off again. Both of those happen in between favorable and unfavorable. We're still climbing that hill, buddy. We're still getting there.
We'll keep pushing, man, because it's worth it, I think. But what I see happening now is the opposite. Now Trump's talking about adding territory with Canada.
That's bizarre. It's crazy to me. So I have seen. Okay, so this is recent news. I mean, this is all brand new in the last month, 2 weeks. So I have seen some secessionists go bonkers. It's like, the point is smaller. Why are you going bigger? This is insane. This is stupid. This is ridiculous. I think they're partly right. But that wasn't my first reaction, honestly. So I'll go against the grain of my peers and say this. If Greenland decides they would rather be American than Danish, Denmarkish, whatever they call that, Danish. If they get together and vote and say, I'd rather join that guy, by golly, I'm in favor of that. If we can go through some reasonable process to change a political affiliation, that's a precedent in my favor. I don't care if it's adding territory that's a bad idea or not. That's a precedent in my favor. I have said, in the meme wars on Twitter, as everything goes, right? People post a picture of the whole entire continent with the United States flag on it. Say, well, what do you think? I say, I think that's a terrible idea. Neutralization is way better. But there's that little kernel of truth. If we can navigate ways to join and disjoin peacefully, that's still progress. I'm still climbing that hill, buddy. That's the way I look at it. I don't think expansion is great. I don't think it's a good idea, really. It might be to our advantage some, but we're super hypocritical about how we apply that. So Puerto Rico has voted umpteen gazillion times to be a state, and we own them, kind of. They're some sort of affiliated territory, and we don't treat them well in that regard. They
No.
should give up on. I suggested that they should give up on that and focus on being independent and quit waiting for somebody to come save them. That would be the better path forward for those guys. But again, I'm curious what would happen with Greenland. If they shoot, if we just buy off the whole government somehow and we just do it like mechanically, or if we do it democratically, and we put it to a vote and the people get to decide. So we've got this offer on the table from the United States. Do we take that or do we stay with Denmark? That'd be a pretty responsible way to do things. I don't have much faith in the government doing it responsibly. But if they did though, man, wouldn't that be cool for us secessionists? Because we've established a process of respecting the will of the people and how we decide these things.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm cautiously optimistic maybe that democracy might prevail and give us some ways forward as separatists, while at the same time super crazy skeptical. Expansion is not the right move. More affiliations, more free trade agreements, more these guys are my friends and everything's cool. More of that. Yeah, for sure. That's the foundation of the whole thing.
Yeah, I'm afraid Greenland would end up more like Puerto Rico, as maybe a territory that doesn't get much say in the national.
Jack dilly crap. We just build bases there, so we can. Yeah. That'd be my guess. And honestly, if I was from Greenland, I don't know if I'd vote for that or not. I don't know their local circumstances. Not very many of them. They might benefit economically from having us bring in construction projects and people to support. And I don't know if it's to their benefit or not. I could see how it might be. But I could also see how they might not want to. And I don't have a mixed metaphors. I don't have a horse in that fight.
Right. Yeah. Well, so last time Trump won in 2016, I feel like I heard more rumblings from the left, from like the West Coast states, talking about maybe we should separate. This time, it's not so much, and I think that speaks to the left tribe kind of mindset of, no, we kind of have to control everybody. We're not satisfied unless we do.
I don't know. So Cal Exit really took off last time, right, as Trump won. Frank Buckley in 2022 wrote a book from the left perspective called American Secession about maybe the best way is to split from the left. I would say that impulse and that stuff is still there, except that it's early, right? Buckley didn't get his book out on the Trump chaos until 22, right? And, Cal Exit was the strongest in 2018, 2019, a couple, 3 years later. It takes some time to build in momentum and infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you, because I'm friends with some of those guys, that they're building right now. Yeah, it's not rumbling in the media yet. They are absolutely working on it. Now, the other side is kind of funny. One of the things that the right, the left says a lot when we talk about Texas independence is like, well, how's that power grid? What about Hurricane Harvey? Like, there are times when terrible things happen. We all accept assistance from anybody during those times. Those are not the times when it's popular to say we don't need those guys over there, right? You can make the point that they're giving us our money back that we've been contributing. It was ours to begin with, but that's not a popular message. Nobody gets that. And if California is literally on fire right now in major cities, it's going to be hard for a minute for that message to take off if they're finally on the receiving end of some federal stuff. Granted, it's their money and they over-contribute to the Fed relative to other states. They'll miss that point entirely because they're payday, finally. Again, I still think we are all better off to some degree dealing with our own stuff and relying on our neighbors. I don't think California, for example, their neighbors are not Washington, D.C. That's way the heck on the other side, right? That's my personal take.
Yeah. Well, it kind of comes down to that.
We do better helping each other out than we do waiting on Daddy to swoop in with all of our money we've loaned him.
You take it back to the Dunbar thing again. Like, 150 people around you and your solid connection with them. You're going to have their interests in mind much, much more than anybody across the country in D.C. or New York or
well, and that's concentric circles, right? So if stuff went down in Houston, I'm likely to help them because they're part of my state, right? If stuff went down in Oklahoma, I'm likely to help them because I'm kind of close. I can go help those guys. If stuff went down in Minnesota, that's too far. I can't go that far. There's just some practical limits to how far you can supply your assistance. Yeah, I think that's just largely geography. There's probably some advantages to a giant federal system or coalition that runs that stuff. But last time I checked, NATO, for example, was a free association. Nobody was forced to be a part of NATO. I think that's okay. Those way over there, they're my friends, and if something happens, I'll help them. That's way better than what we currently have, which is I will steal all your money and rarely give you some back.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the left versus right a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
You say if you don't understand the other side, you're more likely to mistreat them.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we
I think
understand
so.
the left in general? I know there's different tribes within that, but
So let me summarize it this way, because I can equally summarize the right in a minute. I think largely the left wants to help people. They want things to be better. They really do. And they have these ideas, two big ones, but one would be tribes are bad, when really I would say it's the assholes that are bad, but they'll say tribes are bad. And so if we were just one giant tribe, if we had the perfect Rodney King world, can't we all just get along? And everybody was the same. That would be better. Okay, I get that impulse. I mean, it's not totally irrational. It's really not irrational at all. Where it breaks down, though, is that somebody has to decide what the common denominators are, right? Somebody has to decide what's acceptable and what's not. Use, Iran, ISIS as an example. Again, I think those are bad guys. I really do. But if I decided to form a country based on my religion, and some country on the other side of the world decided to blow me up or economically sanction me for that, I might be a little grumpy, right? So again, whether they're right or wrong, I don't think they're right, but I sure understand, right, that this globalist impulse of the way it should be is against certain positions. So we use force against those guys. That's one of their errors, is that somebody gets to decide what's in and out, and then they can use force somehow to enforce their way. Not keen on that. So that's kind of my challenge with the globalists, is that it doesn't respect cultural diversity, which is funny because they want to pretend like it's the most respected.
right, they want all the diversity in one tribe, and I kind of just don't think that's possible.
I don't think so either. But that's where they're coming from, though. They're not insane. They just want the world to be better. Like, what if we didn't fight? What if we were all, what if we could eliminate the assholes by making one big tribe?
And they want to systematize it so it's kind of locked in, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So the other big one on the left is the greater good. Like, it would be better if sick people got medical care. Yeah, it would. It would be better if people didn't go hungry. People had houses. It would be better for each one of those individuals and for humanity as a whole. It would be better. And so they work towards that goal. Not irrationally at all. It's reasonable. I just want that guy, any guy, to have a better life. So, they're in favor of various social programs or various government interventions in the free market, or all these things that are designed to protect a minority or serve a minority or empower some person that needs empowerment. Cool. Where does that break down, though? To me, it breaks down on somebody has to pay for all that stuff. Slavery, right, is where somebody else has the rights to the fruits of your labor. What percentage of that is okay? Right. So if healthcare is a right, does that trump the doctor's right to get paid for the service they provide? Like, which right is going to win? So everybody's right a little bit. The doctor deserves to get paid for all that education and the work they do. And people deserve to be treated and not die. That's better. So that's where it falls apart, is who's going to pay for it? Where does the economics come from to support that? That's where we are partly as the United States, is those guys have had substantial influence since at least the Great Depression and have made these huge structural changes to the way the United States takes in and distributes money, to the point that now we're 30 bazillion trillion gajillion dollars in debt. We have overspent trying to do good things. Probably you can argue that a lot of the spending isn't good either. But at the very beginning, it was really, how can we help these people? Let's collectively pool our money and do that over and over to crank to 11, right? But that's where it starts. Can we make the world a better place by pooling our resources? Again, so the problem there is it falls apart economically. Somebody's got to pay for it.
Hey everybody, with the topics being discussed here, I thought it would be a good chance to tell you about my latest bonus episode. It's exactly what Jason says here about socialism, but going really into depth about just what's wrong with this supposed pooling of resources. It's a fun one, and it should be very informative too. Go check it out on my Locals channel, dropthemaskpod.locals.com, or click the link in the description. Go queue it up while you finish this one. Okay, back to the show. Yeah, it's a nice idea, right? But it's
a great idea.
It just doesn't work in practice.
Doesn't work at all, but it's still a good idea. So I want to talk about tax the rich. And so that's the answer to that question when you say it is these greedy bastards, they have $1 billion. We need to take some of that. Well, I don't know. On the one hand, you can say it must take a little bit of greed to amass such a huge fortune. That's other guys like Warren Buffett that are intentionally trying to give away as much as possible. Cool. But do we tax greedy poor people? Are we only going to penalize greediness on the successful end of things, right? You're taking this moral thing like of greed and saying, those guys, they're too greedy. We got to tax them.
So you're saying greed is not directly correlated to your income?
No, definitely not. Definitely not. And so if we're going to only tax the greedy rich people, that's not equitable or fair or any of the things you say you value, right? Takes the moral argument out of it, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely.
They paint the rich as greedy, and so we're entitled to tax them. We don't tax greedy people. That's not the point.
Yeah, the argument I always heard when you get into the numbers of it is like you could take 100% of their wealth, and then you could fund the federal government for about 6 to 8 months.
10 minutes. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Then what? Yeah, that falls apart too, because again, the fallacy is that there's enough pay for it if somebody else pays. It doesn't work.
Yeah,
that's where that one breaks down.
We got to keep going to work, keep bringing home the bacon.
Yep, absolutely.
Another thing the left will say when you talk about splitting up, the objection is like, okay, well, what if Mississippi or whoever decides that now we're independent, we want to institute slavery again? And they really think that no, the national government needs to stop them. So what do you think about that?
It's a straw man a little bit, right? To the universe, the world has moved on largely past slavery in particular. I mean, there are still pockets for sure. At least the entire West has moved away structurally from that. So to use that as the what if, that's sort of like saying, well, if we legalize suppressors, then everybody's going to buy a tank, nuclear missiles. It's like it's a straw man, honestly.
Yeah, it's a bit of an extreme example. The other thing I would
say to that, though, no, let me keep going. So there are countries in the world where homosexuality is criminalized. It's a thing. Now, we don't go to bat for those guys. Like we don't go to pick a bad example. If you're Polish, I'm sorry, but we don't go to Poland. I don't know if they have that law there or not, but we don't go to Poland and say you can't do it that way, right? We have some tolerance for even China doing human rights things that we totally disagree with. So if we can allow New Zealand to do it or some other country on the other side of the world to do it their way, and we hate the way they do it, we should be able to do the same thing with Mississippi. I mean, honestly, again, it's just the application of force to prove social points. And we don't do that universally. I feel like we've got to do that in the United States because what? Because we cover a whole continent? I don't know. It makes no sense to me. Say we allow Venezuela to be socialist. Say, y'all crash and burn yourself. Good luck, sucker. But if California went socialist, should Texas go to war to prevent that? Oh, no. Right? I mean, that's my take on that, is that tolerance of diversity is the key to the whole thing. That's what I say about tribalism. The problem isn't tribes. It's trying to force your way on the other tribes, right? That's the same thing in a state level example.
Yeah, and I think if people really care that much about it, my position would be build a voluntary coalition to go do something about it. Like if you really care that much, go for it. Or
don't freaking live there, right?
Right. Leave,
if you don't like it over there, go somewhere else. We still have that freedom. Yeah, that's my take.
If Mississippi said, all black people are going to be slaves next month, I think they would all probably leave.
Some of them would. Some of them
Yeah.
would. They should. They actually should. And again, I think that's largely a straw man. I don't see that coming.
Yes, I do too.
But
It's an extreme
but
example, but there
it
could be
is.
things that we don't agree
There
with.
could be things. So abortion bans would be a good one. That's one I'll talk about on the right. Let's dive into that.
Yeah, let's go to the right.
One of the sides on the right is how did I frame it in the book? Check my own notes. There's one that's the greater good. That's the left. What did I call them? I want to make sure I call them the same thing I called them. Christian nationalists and individualists and freedom was okay. So there's this idea on the right that those who are best are the ones who solve their own problems, or self-reliant, or figure it out. The self-made man is the ideal. Right? That's a right side perspective, and so there's some truth to that, right? It's admirable to start with whatever and end up with a bunch. Cool. I mean, that we have respected our robber barons for centuries, right? That ability to be successful has been a thing forever. But where it breaks down is like you were saying, when it's just not that simple. When people don't have, people can't get, right? So you end up with this kind of a cold-hearted feel to things. It's like preventing them from getting what they need. Really, it's economically impossible for them to get it. It's not me. But kind of the left will fall off with there should be more for everybody, but nobody can pay. The right will go off the other side and completely ban abortion because abortion is killing babies and killing babies is wrong. So we should stop that entirely. It's just a value. It's a value that killing people's wrong. But it gets forced down on this social issue in a way that impacts multiple levels deep.
Right.
The left breaks down because they can't pay for anything. The right breaks down because they hold these views so strongly that they take away other people's freedoms entirely. I think that's a problem. Again, I fall in the camp on that issue that I couldn't kill my baby. I don't think that's a thing. But I also respect that people's lives are complicated. You know, we respect, for example, that self-defense is different than premeditated murder. And we get that. If somebody's coming in my house, at least in Texas, I have the right to use deadly force to prevent that. And that's not the same as, hunting them down and shooting them in the street. And I think that continuum of values associated with killing applies to babies, probably. That's just my take. There are times when it's sort of a self-defense option. Like, of all the bad choices I have, this one's the best bad choice I have. I don't want the government really being involved in that decision-making process. That's where I take issue with the right here. I do believe every abortion kills a baby, sure. But I don't really want the government deciding the rights and wrongs of those circumstances.
Yeah.
That's just me.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I sit.
But again, that's my issue with, again, I just talked about abortion because it's the issue with this side of the right, with the self-determination people, is that they have limits. And so they try to self-determine other people's stuff all the time. Again, it's a fallacy. And so when the left says, all you guys just want to infringe on my bodily autonomy, they're not wrong. Just like we say, yeah, but nobody can pay for it. We're not wrong either. So again, that's the point of this analysis, though, is that each place starts with a good position. Push it to a limit where it doesn't work for.
I think drugs are another good example of that.
Mm-hmm.
I personally don't think people should abuse their bodies that way.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Kill themselves with drugs, but also people are going to. And should somebody be locked up in a cage for smoking marijuana? No.
Right,
I don't believe
right.
that.
Which that one in particular is a freaking plant. Like, okay, we're not talking about synthesizing methamphetamines out of poisonous chemicals. It's a plant. Right. It exists in nature before I was here. Right. And are we really going to lock people in cages for that? Well,
Yeah.
I don't know. Again, I don't think it's a good
even
idea.
Harder drugs, man. Like, no, people need help if they're doing that.
Yeah.
People don't want help, but that's their choice.
Yeah,
I can't save everybody.
That's kind of my take. I think, you might have some point at which you say this is the line of these are out of bounds or not helpful at all. I don't know where that line is, but I know right now that our approach isn't working because we've got lots and lots of mothers and fathers in jail over plants. That's not okay. That's not good either.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Cool. Well, I think we
so
could switch gears a little bit, unless you had
sure.
something else.
Well, I was going to talk about let me talk about Christian nationalism for a
Oh
second,
yeah, go ahead.
because that's a kind of a flavor on the right of Jesus is a nice guy, and Judeo-Christian ethics are good, better even maybe they would say. So what if we make that the driving force behind our national government? If our national government was good and based on good moral principles, and that sounds great. It sounds just as great as what if everybody had the services they need. What it fails to respect is the huge diversity within Christianity itself. It is actually Christians who are fighting over abortion, believe it or not. It's actually Christians who are fighting over same-sex marriage. The diversity of Christianity is not respected at all in that Christian nationalism flavor. Um, the other thing that it does poorly is that the way I frame it is it crosses the streams, to use the Ghostbusters reference, right? There's some things that ought not be together, and it puts them together. The way I tell the biblical story there is the example I use is that Jesus was offered by Satan control of all the kingdoms of the world, right? As one of his temptations. And would that have been a temptation at all if it were not possible? Like if I said, Jason, I'm going to give you $1 billion and make you president of the universe. If I offered you that, could I accomplish that? No, not at all.
Mm.
It's pointless, right? So if Satan can offer the political power of the kingdoms of the world, I think that means to some degree he has that.
Mhm.
That's where I'm coming from. And so if you try to take the power of politics, the power of government, mix that with the power of Christ and the power of God in the world to achieve good, that's like if we mixed a little Satan in with our God, it would work better. That's the way I see it. You absolutely should have good moral people, Christians even, involved in government and trying to do right by things. I get that. I hope to do that myself. It is better when insane people are not in charge, sure. But to use force and make it that way, not so much, right? Because that
Right,
force
right.
is the power of government, it's the power of the devil, honestly. So that's my take on Christian nationalism. Is yeah, they're some good folks, but if you make it to where you're using force to get your good, then that really makes you bad.
Well, that actually is really nicely related to the last topic I wanted to discuss. I think I might
Yeah,
break
yeah,
this off into a little bonus segment, so everybody
cool.
go check it out on my locals channel.
Still,
Well, we have the
again, even
advantage
though I
of
met
seeing it play out so many times.
so many times over history.
I think, well, I call myself an anarchist. I don't think that will ever really happen. I think we'll always need some kind of tribal
Oh
organization.
yeah, yeah. Well, let's talk about that. So that was the final piece of the tribes was the tribe of freedom. It's like, well, what does it matter if I have a tank? I'm not going to kill people if I have a tank. But then there are bad guys that will kill people if they have tanks. That's where, to me, pure freedom. Oh, it sounds great. I believe in that. I don't describe myself as an ANCAP or an anarchist or whatever the labels are, because I know it breaks down, and it breaks down at the same place a lot of other ones do with assholes. So there will always be somebody that doesn't want to play by the one rule. We only have one rule, non-aggression. Like, I don't kill you and you don't kill me. That's the only rule. And everything else that doesn't hurt somebody is inbounds. I agree with that philosophically. People that don't follow that rule, and that's where that one breaks down. There's always somebody that's got a bigger stick and is willing to use it, willing to break the one non-aggression principle. That's where that one breaks down. It's the same as, but who's going to pay for it? Absolutely true. Everybody should, but they don't. I mean, that's the way I look at anarchy in a technical sense. Is that it's great, it's true, it's a good thing, but it's also going to break down because of bad guys.
Yep.
That's my take there.
That's why I think it won't ever actually happen.
Yeah, there's too many
And
bad
just that
people.
people are hardwired to be tribal and to want
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
something. And if they don't have God or, something
Well,
higher
that
that's not in this world, then I don't think that's possible.
and there's always going to be haves and have-nots. I mean, there's always going to be a need something, and those other guys have it. And then there's always not going to be a way to equitably trade for that. That's just reality. That's where wars come from over years and years and years and centuries. But I need those things, and they have them, so I'm going to go get them. Money or economic influence or trade routes or corn. It doesn't matter what it is, some commodity. That's where it comes from. But again, I would argue that localized fighting over who controls the corn crop is still better than a global. Willing to take that chance. I know people are bad, but I think it would be a better state to decentralize and let the bad guys be small bad guys, honestly.
Yeah, let people self-sort. I think the answer, at least philosophically, is as much as possible, let people conduct transactions voluntarily, including where they live, including who you associate with.
Yep, for sure.
You had a quote from Mises who said something like, if the inhabitants of a particular area want to join another tribe or be independent, they should be allowed to go. And that's the only way that you prevent revolutions and civil wars, which are devastating.
For sure. And that's really, again, I'll circle all the way back to the beginning. That's why I wrote this book, guys. I see behavior problems as my day job, and I think, well, how can I get ahead of that? That's all this book is. Here's some plans, here's some strategies to maybe not kill each other, not have a civil war, to not, to separate peacefully. I've said before, in a divorce, there's a separation. It's negotiated. It's usually nasty. Nobody has a good time hardly in a divorce. I get that. But there's still this expectation that if you kill the other one, it's wrong. Right? Like, even though it's acrimonious and terrible and gross, there's still this expectation that I can't beat them up. Like, I can't physically harm them. That's part of why I like this metaphor. I think we've got to get to that point.
For all the jerks out there, there's still we still manage to function mostly in society with millions of people together. So it's pretty amazing. Well, anyway, Jason, I think I've taken enough of your Saturday morning. I'll let you get back to your pig. I will not explain that to the audience.
Yeah.
Go pick up National Divorce, everybody, A Plan for Peace. Anything else you want to point people to?
Yeah, so the website to get that is national-divorce.com. It's national-divorce.com. You can buy it on Amazon if you think Jeff Bezos needs more money. I wish you would buy it from me. National-divorce.com, and I'll send you autographed copies.
I got mine. It's hand-signed, by the way.
There you go. That makes it worth 0 cents more than inside.
It'll be worth something soon.
Yeah. Well, again,
it's worth something to me. That's what matters.
People will listen. I'm just trying to make the world a better place.
I love it. It's great. Thank you, Jason, again.
Thank you, Jason.
Everybody, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Thanks for watching Drop the Mask. I hope you enjoyed the show. Let me give you just one more reason to go over to my locals page. Jason and I had another segment discussing the story in the Bible that is closest to a government-free society. It's the story of Samuel and what happens when his people beg him for a king. He tells them all the things that will happen, and sure enough, they do. Just like any anarchist would predict. So go to dropthemaskpod.locals.com and check it out. It'll be up real soon. Thanks again.